Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that I see a lot of different faces than I saw at Sweet Charity at Whitford, because this is our 25th anniversary, and if you haven't already, you're going to get sick of seeing me as we celebrate our 25th. But this is the first of our TED Talks in April, and we're delighted that you're all here. This is a banner crowd. If I'd known Karen was going to make me speak to such a large crowd, I wouldn't have come. But we are going to start with our TED Talk, and we are going to then go to the panel. We'll introduce them after we see this wonderful TED Talk. And I'm glad to see people filling in up here in the front. This panel is nothing to be afraid of. I know them all, and they're great. So please enjoy the show, as it were, the TED Talk, and we'll have a discussion afterwards. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Dan Pallotta sent a note to us a month ago, and he offered to come in and facilitate our session. True to his core values, he also set his fee as $25,000. So this is good for Dan. He actually, since 2013, has barely been out trying to change the way people think about the nonprofit sector. So instead of spending $25,000 on Dan, we took the liberty of letting me, Karen Simmons, the CEO of the Community Foundation, be your moderator for this afternoon, and I have 4 fantastic panelists. So what we'd like to do is you have the questions that we're going to be posing the panelists, and till about 6 or 6:15, we'll take some time to really take a look at what Dan said and how it's playing out. Now, you have the bios of our panelists, so I am not going to be the type of person that reads them over and over again, unless you'd really like me to. No. All right. So we have Alan Novak. Thank you very much for joining us today. Mary Holloran, Cindy Ray, CPA, and Lou Titai. Thank you very much. So their bios are right here on the front of your page, but what I would like to do is actually have you all give brief introductions in this framework about your affinity and experience with the nonprofit sector. And Lou, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk tiny bit, 30-second intro each. What roles have you had within the non-for-profit sector? I know you're an estate planning attorney by day, but you do certain things by night. And what size nonprofits have you mostly been affiliated with? Local geography, local, national, international, outer space, whatever, and where your passions lie. So if you would, let's just go down and starting with Lou.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Mostly, I would say mid-size and mid-size and regional are the two. As far as the passions, I'd have to say all of the above. I looked at that list, and it's hard to. I'm interested in all of them, but the ones that I've concentrated in are health, human services, and education. I've served on boards primarily at hospitals and schools, private schools, Catholic schools. I have a deep love of education and healthcare, and so and the Community Foundation. I've served on the Community Foundation, and that has exposed me to a number of charities and nonprofits along that whole passion scale.
Okay. And mostly within the greater Philadelphia region?
Yeah, definitely within the greater Philadelphia region, nothing outside of the Delaware Valley, I would say.
Very good. Cindy Ray, CPA. I love that. How about you?
Okay, so roles, I've had all of these.
Yeah.
I've been in staff. I started out in my accounting career as an auditor. I also worked for a private school. I've been a volunteer, consultant, donor, all of those things. Also, all sizes of organizations, from organizations with actually no budget, all the way up to organizations in the $300 million range. Geography, again, local, regional, national, and international. And my passion, I would say, I've spent a lot of my personal time around the issues of women and families, but my passion is really the nonprofit sector. So I, have looked at that from a lot of different directions and try and, I'm, a convert, so.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Mary?
I'm a little bit of everything. My first board that I sat on years ago was the Brandywine Y, and I was involved with the Y for 25 years. 4 of those years were with the corporate board when the Y merged with Westchester Y. So I learned so much from that. The Y being a national organization, we smaller Ys learned from the national. So it's part of a national organization. I was one of the founding members of the Downingtown Main Street program. That was grassroots, that was local, that was revitalizing the community. I've been on the board of the Brandywine Health Foundation for 9 years, and I'm born and raised in Coatesville, and I love Coatesville, and we're trying to take care of the health and wellness of Coatesville. And then my final love has been the Downingtown Library. When I retired 12 years ago, I was asked to join the board, and I said yes, and it was a very modest board, and we went into a $2.2 million campaign, and we were successful. And that's where I am now. My true love is for the greater health of all the communities, with literacy being the most important at this stage.
Thank you. And Alan?
Every seat in a boardroom.
Every seat in the boardroom?
At one point or another, I chaired the board of trustees for Liberal Arts College, been general counsel to a not-for-profit, executive director of a statewide trade association, which is a not-for-profit. Independence Blue Cross is a not-for-profit. So all sizes, every seat, grassroots. Passion today is interesting. Having spent 12 years on our Science Colleges board, I am passionate about community colleges and not higher education.
Really?
I have seen where I think my passion is aligning education today with job outcomes today, and avoiding student debt or trying to grapple with student debt. So the 12 years in one institution drove me to focus on another.
I understand that. Interesting. Good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that bit of an overview. And for whoever phone just rang, for the next person whose phone rings, $1,000 goes to the Community Foundation. I just turned mine on. All right. So, Dan Pallotta is a pretty strong man. Americans should stop fixating on overhead costs and salaries and instead focus on nonprofits' ability to accomplish big mission-related goals. And he uses a lot of language about a world that works for everyone and demoralizing nonprofits by forcing us to take a look at overhead and all that. Some people agree with that, some people disagree with that, and some people are in the middle. I'd like to understand where you are. So we invented these lovely flags. What's your stand? First panelist, where are you? Take the one off where you are, throw the others away, and you can always grab them later. Interesting. Really? Really? Go ahead. Okay, who's where? Toss the other ones down. Is everybody Greek? Yeah, okay, so I am too, Mayor. Okay,
Within degrees.
Okay, all right, all right, so y'all have flags too, all right? So where are you? And if you don't have flags, interesting. Yeah, share if you don't. You can tear them apart, you really can, just so you can see. Like I'm mostly green, but some yellows.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who's, no? Oh, great, we got, Janet, you don't have do you need colors? Go ahead. All right, so there's a lot of green in this room. More green than I thought. Interesting. Okay. All right, what? Well, he is very persuasive. All right, so we have a lot of green in this room and some yellow. So let's figure out what this looks like and how to make it happen. All right? So why do you think this? I mean, I've been in Chester County for a long time, and I've found that nonprofits are fairly underfunded. It's very hard to raise money for nonprofits in Chester County. It's kind of hard to get folks to volunteer and serve on boards, yet we're all saying that nonprofits should have more resources and all that. So what leads you to your opinion? Go for the red-green, or the yellow-green, Mary.
Well, my opinion is really, as a businesswoman, I own my own business for 30 years, and I learned the hard way. I was young when I bought my business, and I didn't want to spend money on advertising, and I didn't want to do this, and I thought I can just do it. When people find out that I'm the best picture framer, they're going to come to me. I was completely wrong, and I had to advertise, and I was on WCOJ. My mother's advice, we always take my mother's advice. And people started coming in, and I learned the hard way that you do have to spend money to make money. The first board that I was on was the YMCA, and it was a healthy organization with a great infrastructure. And the next nonprofit that I was involved with, the Main Street program, we were able to get seed money from the state. We got a Main Street grant, $35,000 to hire a Main Street manager. Great seed money. But so this is where my yellow is where do the little nonprofits get their seed money? Where, you know, how do you pitch that? When you're in a capital campaign, you say, we're going to build this big building. We're going to do this. We can show you pictures. But how do you say, I need money for infrastructure, overhead? That's this tough thing that I hope we discuss today. So,
Okay, so that would lead you to the, what, Alan, you have something to say?
Well, I think to degrees. I think the example given in the talk was large scale.
Yeah.
But people don't start at large scale. People build to scale. Or somebody takes over an organization with a potential to go to large scale and has a lot of mechanisms in place and has the talent to build it to large scale. But to Mary's point, starting from small scale, so it's relative. It's relative to the dimensions of your goals and relative to the ability to persuade donors that that's the outcome for their dollars and not the outcome that they may think they want to see. And that's a persuasive argument that somebody who can tell a story really well has to be able to do, to drive an organization to that kind of thinking.
What else? Wilbur, Cindy?
When I actually feel like that argument is for the fact that we need to educate people and help people to understand that we have to support the mission and not worry about, like, not going to say not worry about it. Of course you want an organization to be well-run and all that other stuff, but, I mean, one thing that's true is there's no regulated definition of overhead. Okay, so I mean, from the auditor's side, so what one person puts down as overhead may not be what another organization considers overhead. And there's no one that tells them what that has to be. So if you're using a 990 to say, okay, well, they have this percentage of management in general and this percentage of program, I mean, and not that anybody's being dishonest at all. It's just that they have different views of what overhead is. And then the other thing is and so they can be, the allocations look different. I mean, that's a very, accounting part of it. The other thing is that almost always the biggest part of your overhead are people.
Right.
So, I mean, nonprofits are employers. They provide jobs for people. They do pay the payroll taxes. They do all those other things. So, I think to just focus on overhead is really not the way to go, and that it really has to be more about what are you trying to accomplish. And, long-range planning, maybe it will take you a couple years to get there, so.
So that's what leads you to your opinion. We'll come back to that. Lou?
Yeah, I see it as it's a culture thing for me, and candidly, it concerns me because the nonprofit that I can think of most and I love is it happens to be a hospital, and it's a system. And basically, my passion is planned giving. I'm trying to get people, because of what I do, I try to get people to thinking about giving to charitable organizations when they pass, or during their lifetime, but usually when they pass, because they can give it at a time when they don't need it anymore. And the things that we fight and the things that we counter with is frequently clients, when I ask clients on the 4th page of a 5-page questionnaire, how do you feel about giving to a charity? Do you want to make any charitable bequests? If they just ask that question, the answer is generally no. And I said charity starts at home. I want to give it to my 3 kids. They don't look at the dollars. They don't look at maybe what it's going to do to the kids. They don't think about whether charity should be a partner in terms of that. And it's not incumbent upon me. It's bad for me ethically. I can't really impose my thoughts and my feelings about that. But I try to at least open the door to the idea. The reason that's relevant to me is, the example is, in the institution that I referenced, we're trying to get planned giving moving and off the ground and building a pipeline of gifts in the future. And immediately what I see is cutbacks. I see cutbacks. Do you have a planned giving officer at each hospital? No. They have one in the central place. And every plan giving expert that you talk to in the country will tell you that the only way you're going to develop a plan giving network is to have touches with people. Touches. You have to touch them. You have to be with them. You have to maybe send a newsletter, call them on the phone, check in. How are they doing? 7 touches a year. You can't do that with a minimal staff, and it plays right into what Dan was saying in his program. The best and the brightest aren't being hired by the charities or the nonprofits. They're being hired, and understandably so. You know, we live in a culture where we want to try to do the best we can for us and our families. So we're going to go after the dollars unless we're really, really, really dedicated. And sometimes then that person ends up being controlled by the guy on the board or the woman on the board that is getting the $400,000 job in the example and is telling this person what to do. And so I think we've got it kind of backwards. And the last thing I'll say on that is that we're trained that cost per dollar raised as a board member. When we're valuing and evaluating our nonprofits, we say, look at the cost per dollar raised, and we've got a range. And if it's outside that range, we got a problem. And what's usually the thing that what you do when you have a problem with cost per dollar raised? You start cutting back the overhead.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I'm sorry.
One of the most vigorous debates, discussions we had in your Zionist Board of Trustees was to double and triple the size of the development staff. To create the army
Right.
that you talked about, Lou.
Right.
The army that goes out there and touches the alumni, who tend to be institution of higher learning's major source. unless
So
somebody
even
wants
at
a
the
building.
university level, it was a major discussion
It
over
was
prolonged, painful.
newer board members versus older board members in terms of service, years of service.
So how did that play out over time?
We put metrics.
Okay.
We said, we'll do this, you know, as chair, I was able to move it. We put metrics on the development office. We're gonna do this for you, and we're gonna give you your people, but here's what we wanna see in return in terms of milestones and dollars raised, and people meeting, and where you go around the country to meet people. So we wanted some, you know, because we needed, frankly, to convince the members that reluctantly voted yes or didn't vote yes.
Right. Cindy, you want to add to that? Because the metrics are interesting to me, and with Lou, with the planned giving. You're really talking about, planned giving isn't about immediate dollars raised, but it is the number of visits, number of calls, the cultivation over time. But from an accounting side, how do you measure that sort of stuff? How do you keep it in place over the years? Might not be immediate dollars, for the planned giving especially.
Well, I mean, I think you have to, you know, you have a strategic plan, you have a long-term plan, and then you have short-term goals, and, you know, and I do think it's important to track the touches, or as you say, or whatever they are, in your progress towards that. And, you know, if you have to make a shift, then you need to be a little bit, you need to be flexible to see, you know, what is working and what's not working. But I mean, there's no prohibition, you know, in terms of what the money that you're spending. There's no prohibition against spending money on fundraising. You know, I mean, there's no regulation against it, I'll say, so.
Ideas, comments, reactions? I thought somebody had something.
I'm a fan plot of the cycle. I'll put that out there. When I was hired 4 years ago, I told my board to watch it after they hired me.
You told your board to watch
After they
it?
hired me. One of the things I think culturally we need to do is look at our board makeup. And if you'll notice, a lot of boards, we have very few sales and marketing people on boards. And you know, lots of lawyers, accountants, and so forth, but risk is not part of that thinking. Competition is not part of that thinking. There's 43,000 nonprofits in there is 4,000 in Chester County. If you don't market, if you don't advertise, if you don't get your mission out there, nobody knows who you are. I worked in Surrey Services until recently, nobody knew who we were out here. 38 years, nobody knew who we were. You know, we're doubling the size of development, we're doubling the size of marketing. My board's very progressive, and I basically talked about investing. It's gonna take 3, 4, 5 years before we see the results. But I think we need to get more people with creative marketing minds on boards to bring up the ideas of how can we grow. Because we don't talk about risk, we don't talk about sales or profit, we don't talk about those terms, but we're a business. And we don't talk about it.
You got it, Ellen? Yeah? What else, Mary?
Well, and you're touching on a point that I think is very important, is building a board. And here in Chester County, the United Way runs an incredible leadership program, incredible. And I was on the board of the Downingtown Library for 12 years. And you had to, well, let's go back to the original Main Street program. We had to build that board. We had a wonderful man from the state who was a consultant. He said, build your board. You need X, Y, Z. He didn't say marketing, and I wrote that down because that's very, very important. And once again, we're back to running it like a business. But you have to be very strategic in how you build a board. You just can't say, oh, I like the cut of your jib, and why don't you join my board? You look for what you need. You have to analyze that, and then find the perfect person. And then the personality of that person, and who they can bring in and what they can do. Because your board is basically the salesperson for the whole. So it's by force of personality, hard work, all the different, you have to find your needs. But I think the board is a key thing.
Now, you just said something that's near and dear to my heart, Toni Morris, board chair, that the board is your salesperson for the organization.
Yeah.
You want to expound on that a little bit?
Well,
Because some people will say the CEO is the salesperson, Mary.
No, that's asking the CEO to do more than what it should be doing. The board is supposed to be selling the nonprofit and the elevator speech. The board is, you just organize the chairman, the person who's running, the director. You do your job, and if you have a good board, they do their job.
Okay.
And that's the way I feel. But many of the boards I was on, they were strong, the YMCA, the foundation, they have nominating committees, they work very hard in analyzing what they want and what they need. But then when you have these little operating on a shoestring, oftentimes these nonprofits start and somebody has a wonderful vision and an idea. And once again, back to the business thing, before you start a business, you'll do a study, you'll do some research. What are the demographics? What's the market? Some of the nonprofits don't do that. They just say, I have this idea, I'm going to save the world, I'm going to solve world hunger. But there might be other organizations in the county that's doing that. Why don't you align yourself with them? Why reinvent the wheel if you can merge with them, work with them? So the nonprofit, that's my yellow, is where do the little guys find the money? And so that's a whole different subject. You're so right with marketing and sales.
Let's stay on the board thing for a minute, because I really think that is important, because when you're talking about changing the organizational culture of various nonprofit charities and changing the culture of the nonprofit sector overall, I do posit that it's the board culture that has to stand up and say, yes, it's okay for us to spend money on marketing. Yes, let's pay good market rate money for people who work here. Let's pay the CEO enough to do the job. Oh, and that's going to raise other people's salaries too. And let's figure out how to help raise more money and raise more resources, with a full understanding that the CEO and staff cannot do that alone. The board all has to embrace that. But so that's a huge sea shift.
Right. And the Downingtown Library, I joined the board, and I said, well, what's the advertising budget? They didn't have one. They didn't have one. We're too little to have a development person. We're too little to do this. So everybody's scrambling around trying to do things.
Right.
We're growing and getting better, but you need marketing development. You need tools.
How many of you are board members here? How many of you are nonprofit staff members so it's about half and half? Okay, interesting. You had something way in the
Yeah, I
back.
have a question. So I'm Chris Zaccarelli. I'm the CEO at the Crime Victim Center of Chester County. And I think getting our board on board, no pun intended, would be easy. My question is, what if the funders aren't on board? They're still looking at my overhead. The thing that's frustrating to me is they're not looking if it's efficient. They're just looking at the number, to the point of the TED Talk. So, but what happens when the funders are still coming back to that number?
So how do you focus on the impact rather than the dollar amount?
Right.
Yeah. What do you got, Alan? You turned around. Got anything?
Well, yeah, I do.
Yeah, he does.
But I want to go back to that gentleman's point, because the people that helped me sell expanding the development were salespeople who were on board.
So the ones who helped were
They
sales,
were
were
the
the
ones
sales and
that
marketing
became the
folks, got
greatest
it.
advocates in the boardroom. To your point, I think it starts with convincing one donor at a time, one influential board member at the time, you've got to tell your story. And I don't use the term advertising, I use the term telling your story. Every organization, every not-for-profit, every for-profit has to tell its story. So if you change that paradigm from advertising and marketing to telling our story and identifying to whom it is most effective to tell the story and what's the most effective story to tell, you're suddenly shifting that mindset away from, shouldn't spend money on marketing. Well, you got to tell your story.
Gotta
Who
get the
doesn't
story
have to
out.
tell your story?
Okay, all right. What else? What else do you find? Kathy?
Well, as a retired executive director, I found that when I was looking for monies, whether it was grant monies or individual monies, that people always wanted to know the overhead. And in some cases, they were very specific. They said it needs to be under 20%, it needs to be under 12%. So I think there needs to be a change from the funding sources and what they're saying to us, because they were telling us, they were holding us back on some of that. The second thing is, something Cindy said about, or what Alan was saying about the individual people. When you talk to individual people, to say, "Oh, I don't want to give to the organization. I want it to go to the programs."
Yeah.
And so what I found was when I heard people say that, I tried to engage them in some way, have a cup of coffee or have them come in and talk with me, and talk to them individually and say, we wouldn't have these great programs if we didn't have great staff and we didn't have, great board members and that sort of thing. So I think you have to look at your organization and sell it that way too.
What else? What else? Marge, you got something. Marge, and then, yeah.
One of the things that I agree totally with most of the things that have been said, but there's one thing that I haven't heard as much as I think kind of belongs in the conversation. And that is the mission of the organization, the nonprofit itself. I think many of us have been on boards that maybe veered off from the mission, lost sight of particular goals. Money is not the only criteria. It's absolutely critical. The marketing obviously has to be there, but the adherence and the criteria of the mission itself. I noticed one comment jumped out at me from the presentation when he said the amount of money, if they put the money into finding a cure for breast cancer, as if they had found the money, that would have ended the subject. But I think for many people, they would realize that in health issues, there are a lot of other issues.
Right.
And so breast issue is not just a cure.
Right.
It's a multifaceted. And I think by concentrating on just the board or the marketing, we can sometimes miss the mark of what we're really trying to accomplish.
So mission first, and money to
Mission first.
put the mission
And
forward.
also the fact that most of the nonprofits began very, very small. I mean, the Red Cross began on a battlefield. Most of the organizations began in somebody's basement or family room, and then grew from there. But if you don't adhere to the mission, then I think we have a problem.
Focus on mission, money is a way to propel it forward, and going to scale is all part of it, or sometimes keeping small. Somebody else have something? Luke?
I just, I listen to this and I just live in a dream world. I really wish, I kind of wish that I was at the beginning of my career instead of the end, because I think I'd have done some things differently. But I think that the answer is much more than just the board. First of all, when you try to find nonprofit board members, frequently you're usually drawing from the same pool frequently, and people are stretched and they can't do it, and they're worried about the time commitment, and the last thing they're going to be able to do is to be an advocate all the time for the nonprofit. I'm not saying it's a good goal. I think we should do that, and that should be a board member's responsibility. But I think that we need this guy to be out teaching our young people, because it's probably too late for some. It's never too late. But I think that we need to teach our young people a culture that opens up more to the concept of philanthropy and what it means. That may sound hokey, but I really don't think that it's going to be just at the board levels, because I feel Mary's pain about the smaller nonprofits and how they begin with some capital and getting grassroots capital to start, funding what they need. We need people to understand that when we ask the question, how do you feel about making a charitable gift? We don't get a yes or no answer, just saying, so I will tell you, my demographic is, if I ask that question generally to my clients, that question alone, 80% of them are going to say no. And they don't feel that. He said, people want to be asked. They want to be asked. And that's what in my mind, that's what we're missing. And the frustration I feel is that, Chris, you're right, they're asking cost per dollar raise, they're looking at overhead. And we have to change that paradigm so that people, our younger people, understand that if we're going to affect change, we need them to be part of it. And
I would echo what you're saying, Lou, because if you're trying to put the epitaph on overhead, a la what we saw in that talk, you're not going to take it from 2% to 3% of GDP just by boards. There's got to be an innovative way to get the change in thinking out there. I don't have the answer, but it's going to have to be. And I'm not saying that it's not boards when you're talking about Chester County. It absolutely has to be.
Yeah.
But in terms of changing it from 2 to 3% of GDP, I think we need a better answer. And
Well, you know what? All right, I have a millennial hand up, don't I? I'll take it, give it to you.
I love your point, Lou, about teaching the next generation, and I think that's so key. And back to Chris's point, sort of what's our responsibility, though, too, as nonprofits, because since donors are continuing to ask that question, that's the question we throw out there to answer, especially if our numbers are good. So it's almost like we need a pact among all of the nonprofits. We're not going to share our overhead. We're not going to brag on that basis. I'm sitting on a campaign piece right now that we're working on, where we're going to be bragging about our overhead because we know we're asked about it all the time. But like, I kind of wish that we would just all resolve it.
Well, we're all gonna exceed our overhead or something.
Yeah, it's terrible. I'm proud of it. We need nonprofits have some role. Like, what is our role in shifting that?
See, I have the sense from the millennials who work with us at the Community Foundation, on our staff and on our committees and our giving circles, that this upcoming generation understands the cost of doing business and is not afraid to invest. And marketing is huge. Social media is easy. Things should be out there. It shouldn't be hidden. And it's okay to make a lot of money and do good. So why aren't you paying me? So it's interesting that I have a sense that this generation that's rising is actually in a good place to do more work and volunteer work and board work in the nonprofit sector.
And they feel strongly about their causes, right?
Passion for the causes and energy for the causes, and wants to partner more. So I do have a sense that GDP can get risen, and it actually has a lot to do with reaching out to younger people to have them serve on committee and boards, because they're those voices that start to look at it as an investment, a social investment. Maybe that's a good part of it.
You might be excited to hear, I was at a chamber event yesterday, and the superintendents from Westchester School District and Downingtown School District were there. And unsolicited, they said that the philanthropy level of those students blows them away on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That all they have to do is ask. And that's just how they're wired. And so, maybe we are making a difference, and it's, generation by generation, we'll get there.
Yeah, so there's some hope. What else?
And as an educator and listening to this all, I think one of the things that is so important moving forward is to not segregate our youngsters. And that was amazing to hear, because it's true. The kids really are so mindfully aware of the needs of our society. But to be able to integrate our young adults and our older adolescents into as mentors, as mentoring positions open up on boards, as part of those boards. And I'm launching a nonprofit. We're at the very, very start. And there are 3 positions we're opening up on the board at certain times for high school kids, so that they can actually be part of understanding what that means. So that there can be this integration instead of the segregation.
Well, and speaking to that, Downingtown, the STEM Academy, a young woman at the STEM Academy started a volunteer fair. And she did this as her Girl Scout project, the project that's equal to the Boy Scouts Eagle Scout. And she created this, and she invited nonprofits to come and set up booths. And they did, and she established it in a way that this will continue. It will be year to year. It won't be just the 1 year that she was there. Well, some of these young people volunteered at the Downingtown Library. And I said, how did you happen to do this? Well, they went to this fair. They said, we like to read, we like libraries. They have consistently been at our library volunteering now for 2 years. Smart, wonderful, great kids. They do care. And the kids there's an energy there with this new technology, Facebook, and all the way that they interact. They reach more people with their cell phone than we would the old-fashioned way. But it's there, and I do agree with you. Meeting these young people and their vision, and I especially like the women, they're proud to be smart. And I really like that, rather than hiding, boys don't like smart girls. It's really very exciting to work with them. And I do think the young people can be a huge game changer for us.
I think the other piece, I'm Phoebe Kitson from the Chester County Food Bank, and Ann Shemiak can speak to this too. The passion for the mission is really clear. If you have a clear mission of what you're doing, and then you articulate that passion, and then you place those individuals in positions of being able to put their passion forward to their ability, training them to new levels, is phenomenal to watch and see. But I think what we're also missing and need to dig a deeper level are where those persons who are different from us, those who speak different languages, those who are caring for their elders that have come to this country, and they're carrying the burden. Those young people who are of minority, and they need that same mentoring. They need to have their passions heard as well. And because we see this at the food bank, because we're throughout the whole county, you got to dig really deep and bring it up. And the schools are a great place to start, so the community colleges, and the college is another one. We see great partnerships with Westchester University and Villanova and Immaculata. They come to volunteer. I get more requests for internships and summer student jobs, and so we just budgeted for 2 positions this summer for 2 post-Coatesville High School graduates, one at Delaware County Community College and one at Pitt. So they wrote to us all winter long, can we work with you this summer, can we work with you this summer? But you've got to dig deep to find that and then nurture them and give them clear job descriptions, identify your mission, give them purpose, and like Chris was saying, they'll come with passion and heart and a ton of friends on Instagram and Facebook.
So then to actually make it an attitude of prosperity rather than scarcity, the bigger pie, to reward the bringing in more constituents, more dollars, more mission initiatives that can be read by it. All right, so help me envision this incredible Chester County region where CEOs and staff are paid more than fair market value. Let's say there's a Chester County bump, all right? So it's not just like Philly bump. So you're paid fair market value. You've got great advertising and marketing budgets. Somehow there's financing available to bring things to scale. Pros and cons, changes. How does it feel different? Start on question 5, the pay issue. If you're at a nonprofit and you make this decision over time to bring it up so that staff salaries come up to market or better, the CEO gets paid like real money to really make sure the outputs and the outcomes happen. How does it feel different? How does the nonprofit feel different? How does it change the traditional relationship between the board and the CEO and the staff? How does the corporate culture feel?
Well, a big difference will be, I think the board will respect the director more.
Because the board will respect the director more?
Yes, they'll be more as equals, rather than they are lower.
Subservient?
Yes.
And that's really what you feel now? You see it?
I'm not seeing it.
You're not seeing, but you are feeling this.
I think if the director was paid more, the director would have a deeper respect from the board. It would put them on equal footing, so to speak.
I just got a point.
Well, yeah, I certainly can see how that might happen. It's not how I would personally feel, and I don't think that the boards that I've been involved with feel that way about the executive directors. Most of the time that the ones that I can think of that I've been involved with have been people that I have a tremendous amount of respect and dedication frankly, for the fact that they're probably following and chasing their passion as opposed to the dollar. And so I'm not sure I thought about your question a lot, and Frank, my thought was is that I'm not sure what, the only difference that I would see that would be huge is that now we've got a paid staff that is doing the things that some of the board members were expected to do because we didn't have enough staff to do it. So now we got staff to do some of the things that the board did. And now the board can think about some global and macro issues that the board generally thinks about in a profit organization to make the organization more profitable and drives to their mission and goes to their mission. So now the board's really cranking up to do what they're supposed to be doing, as opposed to being the day-to-day advocate for the organization, which can be done by the staff and helping get our advertising out and all that. I think it'd be a lot of similarities between a profit and a nonprofit.
So it feels more for-profit-y, yet mission still is the driving factor.
I agree that the mission
Yeah.
is huge.
It has to be.
Has to be. What else, Al?
Yeah, because I think to do this realistically is to recognize that it isn't win-lose. It's not a zero-sum game. You're not going to throw all the money into administration and salaries and forget mission. And you're not going to throw all the money into telling a story and forget
Right.
salary. So
it's all the
it's
interplay.
how do you handle that entire macro piece and incrementally move it. But I think the point, it'll feel like there's more dynamic interaction. I found, frankly, in boardrooms, healthy disagreement is healthy.
Yes.
Constructive disagreement.
Respectful
is-
disagreement and
it's
constructive,
healthy.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you get everybody finally getting engaged. And once they're engaged, you can pivot them to buy in with the outcome. And the ones that don't want to buy in, go. And you bring people in that buy in.
And it's okay if the ones who don't want to buy in
You
go?
don't want to lose your best owners. That's the art of being, that's the art of being a chair or an executive running an organization. You want some people in that boardroom that have your back.
Right.
You want some donors out there that have your back. You convince them, and then they help you convince others.
What else? What else?
I think there's also,
Yes, and
it does put some pressure on the board. If they make the decision to pay good and appropriate salaries, attract great talent, they have to be prepared and they feel a little bit of pressure to justify doing that. So, I mean, there are requirements around, having a compensation committee and evaluating that and doing comps for salaries and all that. I mean, think about that. Do they do that? Is that required in a for-profit industry that you compare your CEO's salary with the CEO of another one?
that you publish it in your 990?
And that you publish it? Yeah, exactly. So, but it does put pressure because, what we hear is, well, what will that look like on the front page of the Inquirer? Such and such CEO. And it's unfortunate, but it's still the truth right now. When we haven't made that shift, we haven't shifted to where the public accepts and feels, of course, they should make that much money. Nonprofit leaders are some of the hardest working people you'll ever want to work with. And so why shouldn't they be compensated appropriately?
Right. It's an investment.
So it's an investment, some controls have to be in place, some market standards. What else? Yes.
But then there's the question, the board might decide that the nonprofit leader should get whatever the salary is, but then that person is raising their own salary. I mean, where does the board, that's all well and good if the board thinks that's a good idea, but if they are putting that back into the hands of the person who raised their own salary.
No, we don't have that happen in this ideal world, right? Right? I mean,
It's a budget process.
it's a whole process, yeah. and
It's a
not
budget.
just
I
there.
believe look, I've been on a bank board for quite a few years, and I've always served on a comp committee. And on the boards I'm familiar with, there is a comp committee. It may not be called that in every situation, but there is a committee that focuses on compensation for executives. And I think that's always about balancing priorities and metrics and holding people accountable and getting, measurable progress. And I don't think you can ever sacrifice mission. I don't think you can ever just abstain from the budget process. Budgeting is by design a process that's give and take, and it's always a compromise. So incrementally, you move the budget along on the salary side, or incrementally, you move the budget along on the telling your story side. And then you put metrics, try to put metrics in place that deal with what a donor wants to see, what the people receiving the mission of the organization want to receive, and how that is valued. and measured, and then fundraising. I think you measure fundraising. You know, you raise this much,
This
your
many
salary's gonna go
touches,
up, because this
this many
much is going to
touches.
mission and this much is going to compensation.
So what does the sector look like in the region if the nonprofit sector has enough money to market and advertise itself and tell its story? What needs to be in place? Are there any downsides to that? What more do we need to do that?
Well, I think one of the things that's sort of missing here is that, like a for-profit, nonprofits need to be measured on the accomplishment of the mission. So a profit company is measured on how well they market their product and how well it does against the competition. Nonprofits should be measured in the same type of a manner, how well they are accomplishing their goal. The overhead that's required to do that should not, as the speaker said, shouldn't be as a big a concern as the results that are generated. And so if the nonprofit can incorporate people that are making lots of money to donate to the nonprofit to achieve their goal, that's still achieving the goal. So it's more the accomplishment of the nonprofit as opposed to the price or the compensation of the nonprofit's board or the CEO. It's how well they are achieving their goals that should be rewarded. And if one nonprofit has a 40% overhead, but is achieving 100% of the goals that they said they would, aren't they doing a better job than a nonprofit that has a 5% overhead that's only achieving 20% of their goals?
Or do you measure against yourself? It's 40% this year and 39% next year. So you're getting more efficient over time, something like that. And I don't want to confuse overhead with salaries because so much of the salaries are going for program, most definitely. Huge, huge. So, depends, says the CPA, right? The classifications are strong, yeah. So what does it look like when we have nonprofits able to take risks and go to scale and make innovations? How do we get that financing to happen? What do we need in this region to get that financing to happen?
That's the biggest problem.
I think it all goes back to education. I really do. I think that it doesn't, he said, it's, what happens if you measure it in the first 6 years, you don't do anything, when you're going to, okay, it's going to take some time, but you got to build it. And I'm really excited about the concept. I mean, every person in this room tonight can leave here and affect change. And they can go back and talk to somebody about what they just heard and start talking to people about what the concept is and how we currently think about it and what it should be, well, and not what it should be, but how maybe it would be better if we didn't think of it the way that we traditionally.
It would likely be better if we thought longer term.
Right.
Take some more risks.
Right, and
it's
overhead's
okay
not necessarily a bad word if it means that we're going to
It's
drive the mission.
impact.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll say on that, I'm really, I can tell you this is working. When I talk to a client about estate planning and charity at the beginning of the conversation, and if we start with not how many kids you have, but what drives you, what's your passion, what do you do, what makes you excited, how do you want to be remembered? And get them thinking that way, and then start talking at the end about how they want their, every client wants their children, if they have children, they want their children to get along. They want them to be happy, well-adjusted. That's what you want. You start talking to them about it, having a family fund, and every year, challenging your kids. They can be 6 years old. I have family people that do this. They give each of their child maybe $100 in Thanksgiving and say, I'm going to give you $100, but it's not yours. You're going to find a charity that's important to you, and you're going to give it to them at Christmas time. So between now and Christmas, you go out there and find a charity, and you come back and tell me what you think. And then all the kids do it. They have a little competition. They think, I'm going to find a charity this way, that way. One might go to Cost per Dollar Raised because there's a website that says that that's what you should do or whatever. But my point is that drives it. And when clients start thinking that way, they start thinking more about maybe that pie not being divided 3 ways, but maybe 4 ways or 3.5 ways, or giving a little piece to a charity or charities. And if you drive that and you get people thinking that way, more and more people thinking that way, I think that more, we need his video basically out there in the schools. And that sounds crazy, but we do. We need to educate that that's a neat way of thinking. You don't all have to agree, but it seemed like there was a lot of enthusiasm about the concept of of what Dan Plata was just saying. So I'm sorry, I just get very excited when I talk about that concept because it works. I had a client today that came in. He did very well. He sold a business. He told his kids, three adult children, he said, I'm giving you X dollars. He said, but 10% of it's going to charity. So you tell me who it's gone to. We'll look at it, we'll talk about it, and we'll see what happens. And then the kids talk about it at Christmas time. And now they got a family fund. So when the parents are gone, the kids are going to get together year after year and think about what was important to mom and dad, what's important to them. They're going to expand the charities, start giving. It works, but it's going to take time. So.
Fascinating. What else you got, Janet?
Well, my thought on all this is we have incubators for small businesses. Everybody really wants these small businesses, the technology pieces, they want them to come, they want them to thrive here in Chester County. How do we do that for the nonprofits? How do you provide that nonprofit incubator where you're working on things like these back of the house pieces, and maybe the marketing comes out of that, maybe it's the repository for good ideas of what youth is doing so everyone has access to them. Maybe it's that startup seed money, but do it collectively. Look at collective impact of what problems are we trying to address. Here's an opportunity to fail, here's an opportunity to thrive, here's an opportunity to build it, and out of that you're building this culture where this is possible.
So I'm going to change that thought from nonprofit incubator, which to me says starting more little ones, to nonprofit innovation funds, in a sense. Both? Yeah? So nonprofits have big ideas and need some seed money or some pilot money over time. Where is that funding source? Interesting. And who's taking the risk? Okay.
To take a risk on the collective, knowing
Right.
that some of the projects in there will not succeed.
And some of the
And
collective is also
but some
shared
of them
marketing
will,
as well.
And some of them will just magnify themselves over time
Right.
and be in a position to support others.
So you have angel donors
Angel donors would be
that put a fund together and you let these incubating not-for-profits compete to, or hit metrics that entitle them to some kind of extra hit from that fund or some kind of return. You know, you fashion an ROI or return on investment around a social investment or a mission, hitting a mission.
You can even add your competition piece because they may be competing with each other to come up with the best idea to be the ones.
Well, that's exactly it, and then they could be encouraged to do a feasibility study, and which is something that should be done.
It's a business plan,
A business
feasibility
plan,
study.
feasibility, but this process would encourage that.
And learn how to do it, maybe learn how to do it together, so you're not ending up with 4,000 more nonprofits in Chester County.
And why reinvent the wheel is what I
Partner,
think all the
partner.
time. That's a really good idea.
All right, so partner, feasibility, business planning, social return on investment, innovation funds.
Or even just growth.
Growth funds, growth funds.
If the angel donors decide, we want to see you really step up your game on fundraising, and we want to step up your game on attracting talent.
We're thinking outside the box.
Mm-hmm. And also the whole culture of mindfulness and inclusion and prosperity, changing it from ages up and making it a good thing in the boardroom so it's not a fight, more marketing and investment. Oh, just a few things. Did you guys get that all on tape? 'Cause I think we did. All right, so that's a nice little way to kind of bring in a summary. Anybody else want to add to the summary of what this looks like in this region when it's all fine and dandy in the future? Go ahead.
I'm kind of interested on the panelists' take on social engagement, because I think the TED Talk person was very successful at social engagement, doing those walks. And I'm still trying to figure out why that became a problem for people, that when he spent 40% on his overhead, why did that cause his total collapse? And so,
Political backstabbing from competitive nonprofits that got to a major donor. Sad.
Let me take that one step further. And, you know, so profit organizations often learn from failure. Nonprofits, is there a resource available for nonprofits to look at why nonprofits fail, so that nonprofits that are starting can learn from the failures of others and not have to necessarily go down that same path? So there is some value in understanding, like his breast cancer nonprofit failed because of a misstep. You know, is there a resource available to people so that those failures can be learned from, so that you don't go down that same path. You understand what's best not to report and how to report things so that failure is actually a success as opposed to something that causes failure.
Well, there's case studies and there's organizational learnings. And with large projects, there's some continuous evaluation and reframing. So that's a way to look not at failure, but at things that aren't kind of hitting the mark and try to make in-process refinements. So it all goes to outcomes. If you have some goals and you're trying to measure yourself against your outcomes, and then to be able to readjust those if you're not meeting your mark. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so more on outcomes and evaluation as well. What else?
Hi, one thing that he mentioned that we haven't really talked about is the fact that a lot of social service nonprofits, that what we're trying to embed are really huge problems.
Right.
That what we're trying to do, there's a lot of other forces that are going on around us that we have no control over. I'm the CEO of a homeless shelter. So there's a lot of things that are impacting what is affecting how many homeless are in Chester County. That we have our mission statement and what we're supposed to be doing, but there's a lot of things around us, not just in the economy and what's going on with affordable housing, but what now the county is expecting for people that are working to do. That, you know, we're constantly having to try to adjust and look at our metrics and what are we going to be able to make an impact on. Right. So there are times that we don't miss our mark, not because we weren't doing everything we said we were going to do, but these outside forces have really impacted whether we were able to make an impact.
When nonprofits report an incredibly high success rate, I never believe it, because the issues that we're dealing with are so complex and interconnected to so many other things. So that's why I really do suggest that you benchmark against yourself each year to see if you're getting a little better, unless so many other things are going on that there's reasons you can't. Because you're right, the impact is not all about what your nonprofit does. And you mentioned that with education. You mentioned that with the issues of, so you're right, it's huge. Yeah, and that's the tough one. This is sticky stuff, complex stuff. And so to have volunteers, staff, board members, donors, funders who understand fully that this really is very, very messy in the nonprofit sector, that just because you do some things to help doesn't mean it can really fix things in the short run. And sometimes it cannot fix things, ever. Some of these things are just beyond that. Yet at the same time, really making sure we're doing the right things that are sort of up to scale, large enough with the large enough resources, and best practice, sharing, learning from what doesn't work is the way to really position yourself for success as well. There's a lot to it. How about we talk more over drinks? I want to thank you. This has been a real helpful talk. Thank you. We'll be doing this TED Talk at Longwood Gardens next Monday, and then at Colonial Theater at the end of the month. We're repeating Dan's video and seeing what other people have to say and what other panels has to say. And tailor-made video, Tribe Sound, is recording us to edit it all together so that we can see what we come up with. And so it'll be out to distribute on YouTube and all that within a few weeks. Well, let's give you a few weeks after that. And then in November, we're going to come back with another one. So every 6 months or so, we're going to do a series of these, if that's useful to you. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for getting our thoughts going. And please, eat, drink, and do great things.